All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Douglasville Police Department's first virtual town hall meeting. We do have town hall meetings here at the police department for the last several years. We do quarterly town hall meetings. We discuss a variety of topics. This is our first virtual meeting because of the circumstances, unfortunately. But we hope that we get good participation. I see there's a lot of attendees logging in right now. Tonight's topic is going to be the Douglasville Police Department use of force policy, as well as our training and hiring standards and procedures. So we will be taking questions later on. So if I could just direct everybody, the questions should be submitted on the Q&A tab through Zoom. We're not going to be taking questions through the chat. We're going to do it through Q&A. So if you find that on your Zoom, you can submit a question at any time. You can go ahead and start submitting questions, and we'll be answering those once we get to that portion. We're not going to be answering questions about any other police agencies' use of force policies, nor any pending cases that we have. But we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. And you can submit those at any time, starting now. So first, I'm going to introduce our chief, Gary Sparks, and he's going to bring us into our session.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for being a part of our first town hall meeting, virtual town hall meeting. This is part of our program of community programming where we are completely transparent with our community. You probably have gone over our use of force policy that we placed on our Facebook page last week. This just, like I said earlier, this is just a way that we could show you that we are transparent and we are one with the community. I just want to start off to say that Captain Stafford and Lieutenant Edwards are part of our Office of Professional Standards. And so they are the ones that go over our policies and make sure our policies are in line with our state certification agency. Our department is a state certified agency, so we have to stay in line with our policies and make sure that they are in line with the state agencies in order for us to stay certified. So I'm going to step back and we want to get this information out, and then we will answer the questions that comes in. So I want to thank you all for being a part. Thank you very much.
All right, so we're up to 23 attendees right now. I'm just going to go over real quick again because some of them just came in. We will be answering questions shortly through the Q&A tab on your Zoom, and we'll be getting to those in just a moment. First, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves just briefly, starting with Captain Stafford.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Stafford. I'm the administrative captain here at the police department. I'm in charge of the Office of Professional Standards, which does the hiring, the training of the officers, and also the internal affairs. Go ahead, Major.
All right, Lieutenant Edwards.
I'm Mark Edwards, and I am the lieutenant in the Office of Professional Standards. And like Captain said, we handle all the hiring, training, the accreditation, and also the currently keeping up with the officers' certifications, make sure they stay current.
All right, so those are our two panelists who are going to be answering questions. First, they're going to give a brief explanation of a couple topics. If you're submitting a question, please remember that today's topic is use of force policy and our training and hiring practices. So we're only going to be answering questions about those. So Captain Stafford, if you could go ahead and give us an overview of our use of force policy.
Yes, sir. I think the most important thing anytime we're talking about police use of force, and not just in our agency, but really nationwide, what drives that policy is a landmark Supreme Court decision from 1989 called Graham versus Connor. And what the court decided was that they would look to the Fourth Amendment for any of the use of force cases from this point forward. And the way that they would look at those cases would be from an objectively reasonable officer standpoint. What does that mean? Well, what that means is the court understood that police use of force, when we try to arrest somebody and take them into custody, that's a seizure, which is why they use the Fourth Amendment. And when we do so, they understood that that's a terse, rapidly evolving situation. And so it can't be judged from 2020 hindsight. It has to be looked at from the officer's perspective at the time that the force was used. Very important to understand that. And there were another set of factors that they wanted to look at when they're judging that reasonable officer on the scene. And those three things are the seriousness of the offense that the offender committed. Was it a violent crime, or was it just a small misdemeanor, and so on? Because the use of force could potentially differ and be more force to be reasonable if the crime was more serious. Also, did that offender pose a threat to the officer or a third party? More force could be justified if they were posing a threat. And then finally, is the subject resisting arrest when the officer tries to take him into custody, or did they attempt to flee from the officer when they took him into custody? Because again, more force could be justified based on the actions of the offender at that time. One of the things I know that people are interested in light of the recent event, are our policies on a few specific topics. And there are a couple different movements, several, but a couple I just happened to pick out. One of them is called 8 Can't Wait. The other one's called Campaign Zero. And they generally are looking for police reform in the same areas of our use of force policy. And I just want to touch on a couple things about our policy because it may answer some of your questions that are going to come in tonight. Chokeholds. Do we ban chokeholds? And chokeholds have been against our regulations for a long time and will continue to be. Another one that's a very big topic for discussion right now, which should be, is whether there's a duty to intervene. And we have policy that requires our officers to intervene if they're seeing a use of force that they believe is not justified. It's an excessive use of force. Another one right now is shooting at moving vehicles. Our policy about shooting at moving vehicles is officers are only allowed to use force if that vehicle is being used as a deadly weapon against them and they have no avenue of escape. In other words, they can't jump in front of the car and then say, well, I had to use deadly force because the driver was going to run me down. They have they're not to put themselves in that position. If they have no avenue of escape, then they can use force to save their own lives or the lives of a third party. A force continuum is another subject that's brought up. And our policy is based, again, on the Graham standard. So all the force has to be reasonable. The continuum we use as a training tool, and most agencies do so now, where they talk about what type of force would be reasonable based on what type of resistance that they're receiving from the person during that struggle or that fight, or the person's resisting arrest. So that's simply what a continuum means. It's kind of like a ladder of a use of force. And you start off with none, or you're using verbal commands. And then the next thing would be control techniques, joint manipulation, and so on, where you're getting their hands behind their back. And it goes all the way up with all the different tools, the Aspeton, the taser, and so on that we provide our officers. And we train them on what use of force would be appropriate and reasonable based on the level of force being used against them. So we already have a continuum in place. The next one I want to touch on is the comprehensive use of force reporting software and a review process. And the Douglasville Police Department has gone through a few different versions of reporting software at this point. We're on the next generation right now because we wanted even more out of the software than we had in our first few renditions. But our officers have to report force immediately. And that force not only goes to their supervisor, it sends an email out to every command staff member and the chief about what force was used, when, how, what officer it was, and so on. And then we review that usually within the next day or two that we have a command staff meeting where all of us are in the room together reviewing that force and deciding whether it meets policy, and if it doesn't, what disciplinary action will take place. And so that's our review process and our reporting system. And then finally, de-escalation training has been something that's been talked about a lot. And it's not just right now, it's been over the last several years. And we have de-escalation training. It's state mandated that we have de-escalation training in Georgia. So we have it every year, but we go over and above that. We actually have it more than one time a year. It's great training. It is part of our policy that the officers try to de-escalate in a use of force. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes there's no time. But if there is time, then we expect to do so. We understand all the studies have shown that the more time you spend, especially if you have a mentally ill individual you're dealing with, the more time you spend with them, the lesser the chance of force. And that's exactly what we train our officers. That will continue to be part of our training and part of our policy. So I wanted to touch on those things because I know those are things people are really focused on right now. Maybe that answered some of your questions before you even had to write them down. I hope it did. I will turn it back over to Major Davidson for any questions anybody might have.
All right, thank you, Captain Stafford. So now let's turn to Lieutenant Edwards. Lieutenant, if you could just touch on our hiring procedures, background checks, and then move into our current training that we're doing.
Absolutely. So we have a pretty rigorous hiring process. We're not unlike any other business or even public agency where we need folks, but we understand that hiring somebody for such an important job requires us to look very deeply into their backgrounds. So after the initial interview, if we determine that they are suitable to move forward in the process, we set them up for a polygraph appointment. And in that polygraph, we ask questions that deal with their integrity, as well as their background going into drug use, criminal history, and employment, whether they've had issues in employment at previous employers. And generally, we try to get a good background on them in the polygraph and then actually test them in the polygraph against that background that they've given us. If they pass the polygraph, then they move forward toward the command staff interview. And in the command staff interview, they're given a series of questions, some of which are scenarios where they're asked to give us an answer based on some things that we see actually in police work. And use of force and intervention was mentioned previously by Captain Stafford. One of those questions specifically asks if they see a use of force that is possibly unacceptable or excessive, what would they do? And it's very interesting. A number of people, I'd say majority of people, get this question right, and they understand that unnecessary excessive force should be reported and should be taken to command to make sure that it's that person that uses the excessive force is taken care of. Once they get through the command staff interview, we set them up for a psychological interview and testing. and that is done at a licensed psychologist. And when they complete this psychological testing and interview, the psychologist gives us some idea as to whether they'll be suitable for the police work. It's obviously psychology and the polygraph doesn't give us the whole picture, but through the psychology or the psychological testing, they're able to tell us whether the person is accepting of command, accepting of the duty of being a police officer, whether they have temperament issues. And if they have some of these issues, generally the psychologist will tell us that they are not acceptable. And at that point, that person that's not acceptable does not move forward in the process. If they do pass the polygraph testing and interview process, they move forward. Their file comes back to the Office of Professional Standards, where we begin a very in-depth background check. We check previous employment. We check their references that they list on their application. If they're in the military, we check their military history. Generally, we have a list of contacts for each of the branches of service where we can get information about that person, their service, what, any kind of awards that they accepted, any kind of discipline that they had while they were in the military. We also go to the departments if they're a previous or if they're a current police officer at another department. We go to that department and not only pull their application and their background that they did at the police department, but we also look at any kind of discipline history that they have. We look at their Office of Professional Standards or internal affairs reporting. And if there's any issues there, that obviously will tell us this person is not right for the Douglasville Police Department. Once we get done with all of the background checks, we put everything together and in a nice tidy file, we get it to the police chief. And before they're ever hired on, they are assigned or given an appointment with the chief to discuss what the chief expects of them as a police officer here at the Douglasville Police Department. And it's ultimately up to him, even though they've passed all of these, he has a bad feel for a person. He has that right to decide that they are not right for us. After they're hired, they are sent to an academy if they're not certified. If they are certified, they go straight into some pre-field training instruction with the Office of Professional Standards. Every officer, once they get through the academy, or if they are certified, they have to attend or take part in a 12-week field training process. And in that process, they are acclimated to policing in Douglasville, learning the streets, learning our jargon here that may be different from other departments if they work somewhere else. And they also get to learn the people here in Douglasville. That is the most important part, is understanding who we serve and making sure that they understand that we are a community-oriented agency, and it's up to them to put a good picture out there for our department, make those connections, and know the people, because those people are very important. We are not a police department without the people we serve. So at the end of the 12 weeks, even though they've made it through the academy, or they're already certified and they've made it through the 12 weeks, it's ultimately up to their field training officer and their supervisor to determine whether this person is suitable to continue as a solo officer of the police department. If they are determined suitable, then the police chief and command staff, they are alerted that this person is ready to be released. The chief signs a release letter, and then they are placed as a solo officer on a shift. So it's a very intensive process. We want to make sure that we have the right people here at our department. Obviously, it's a very difficult time hiring the right people, but sometimes it's better to take our time and hire the right people than just to hire people to occupy positions who may not be right for our department. Major?
All right, thank you, Mark. If you could talk a little bit more about some of the training that we're doing, use of force, how often that happens for our officers, and de-escalation, a little bit more, just more details about the training.
Absolutely. So our officers, once they are released to us from the academy or they're hired on, They are mandated by the state to acquire at least 20 hours of training a year. And at our department, we don't think that that is enough. We actually train upwards of 40 to 48 hours a year on different topics. Some of those topics that we're mandated to instruct on are use of force, use of deadly force, de-escalation, community policing, cultural awareness. And the reason why several of those topics are so important to us is we have to help our officers to understand how important, number one, the cultural awareness, understanding who we're dealing with and that not everybody sees things the same way, but also in the de-escalation. And we have to give the officers the tools, not only the tools that are on the tool belt, but mental tools to be able to work through a call. So those two particular classes are very important to us. And the governor actually made that an initiative several years ago where everybody in the state is required to do that. I can say proudly that the city of Douglasville has been teaching de-escalation and cultural awareness and bias-based policing for at least the last 9 to 10 years. As far as use of force, combined with use of force, we have several different weapons platforms that we teach on and we qualify our officers on. We do that at least twice a year for handguns, and we also have other weapons platforms that they're required at least once a year to qualify on. As far as our use of force, that is a very important policy to us, and we make sure that we don't just teach it once a year. We teach use of force several times a year because we teach other types of use of force, other weapons platforms, defensive tactics, taser. And each of those times we make sure that use of force and de-escalation is covered. As a matter of fact, today was the last day of our taser class this month. And in that taser class, use of force and de-escalation was covered. It's not a topic that we cover just because it's the topic that everybody's talking about. We cover because it's a necessary topic for our officers to continually learn from. And every time we teach that class, we are able to pull from examples from what people see on the news, other agencies, and we can dissect that and help our officers to understand how important it is to make the correct decisions when using force. Our other trainings, we have legal updates, we have pursuit training. I can probably say we have a very good regimen of training here at the police department. We want to make sure our officers not only outfitted with the right uniforms and the right equipment, but also the right mental tools and training to do the job and do the job well and treat people correctly. Major.
Okay, thanks, Lieutenant. So we're going to get to some questions now. Just a reminder, you can go to the Q&A tab to submit a question. We are only answering questions about our use of force policy and training and hiring. The first question would be for Captain Stafford, the Office of Professional Standards. The question is, if the policies you just mentioned are violated, what is the procedure on addressing it?
Okay. As I said, there's a reporting system, so those things come through to all of us in the command staff, and we review them very rapidly. It usually not more than a day or two goes by before we're reviewing a use of force. And the chief of police is in those meetings, and we basically go around the table and we discuss policy. We discuss Graham versus Connor that I spoke about earlier, and we decide whether or not there was a violation of policy. Sometimes there is. Sometimes we think that there is a violation of the training standards that we set forth. And sometimes we don't think that they're violated policy, but maybe our policy isn't where it needs to be. And there have been times where we've tweaked the policy and so on. But the final part of your answer is what happens to them. And that's going to vary by how bad was what they did. And that has gone from where we retrain, we call it remedial training, that gets sent to the training division for them to be retrained on how we expect them to perform, all the way up to termination, where they have done something egregious with their use of force, and we can't live with what they did, and we let them go. Major?
Okay, thank you. Lieutenant Edwards, this next question is for you. After being hired, passing a polygraph and psychological testing, are the officers ever retested to see if they are still in line with the requirements needed in the beginning?
Generally, when somebody is retested, let's use polygraph for an example. There's generally some reason why we would need to polygraph them. And that sometimes, or most of the time, originates from an internal affairs investigation. We have very capable, very good officers with great integrity, and we generally don't have those issues. But if a polygraph is used, it's generally for an investigation, an internal investigation. As far as psychological testing, we do actually have officers go through fitness for duty testing with a psychologist, and that is usually related to if there is a use of force or a situation where an officer has had a serious incident where, for instance, a child has died in their presence on a call. We make it available to them to make sure that they are psychologically okay and that they can perform the job as required. But both of those are very important tools that are used in the initial process and are certainly available later on if it's needed for the officer in our department. Major?
All right, Lieutenant, kind of a follow-up about the hiring. What are the requirements to become an officer, age, education, et cetera?
Okay, that's a good question. So every officer, the minimum age here is 21 years of age. And as far as requirements, we require them to have at least 2 years of college or 2 years of prior law enforcement experience in good standing, of course. And then there's another or, which is prior military duty. So if they have at least 2 years prior military, 2 years of college, or previous service requirement, then they can move forward in the process. Major?
All right, this question's for Captain Stafford. Is the taser a lethal weapon or not?
The taser is not a lethal weapon when it's used properly. And some of the confusion that's out there right now, I think, stems from the fact of whether the taser was used appropriately or not to begin with. The taser is an intermediate use of force. So what that means is there's some other force that is below it that could, if possible, should come first. It's lesser force, but it's in the intermediate range. However, the taser can become deadly if it's used inappropriately. And I'll give you an example. If somebody's standing at the top of a fire escape and we're trying to apprehend that person and the officer tases them and they fall to their death because they were in an elevated position, then the taser was used improperly and could become a deadly use of force. If they're tased in water and the officer doesn't immediately go and get them out of that body of water and they drown, it can be a lethal use of force. There have also been times where the officer didn't know that they used the taser properly, but deaths have occurred because there were pre-existing health conditions with that person that the officer didn't know about. So that's where some of the confusion has come in. But it is not classified as a deadly force. Major?
Okay. Lieutenant Edwards, question for you. Is there a potential for citizens to go through some of the training the officers go through to see for themselves how difficult a police officer's job is?
Yes, twice a year we offer what's called a Citizens Police Academy or Citizens Law Enforcement Academy. And it's a great opportunity for citizens to come in and actually see what our officers do. We also offer ride-alongs, and ride-alongs give citizens an opportunity to see firsthand what goes on during a portion of a police officer shift. But going back to the Citizens Police Academy, not only do we expose them to the different divisions that operate here at our department, but we also give them the opportunity to go into the firing range and actually participate in what we call a public handgun clinic. They can see not only how to operate a gun with some proficiency, hopefully, or we can at least give them the tools to work towards proficiency. But they also get to learn about some of the things we've talked about, use of force and use of deadly force. And in addition to that, we have a night where they go to our FAST room, our firearms training simulator, and see firsthand how difficult it is to make quick decisions when confronted with suspects or individuals who may try to hurt the officer. The great thing about the FAST training for our officers is they get to get in situations where it's a potential force on force situation, and we get to see how they react and dissect that reaction and see if we could have done something better, or that officer could have done something better. So when the citizens get to take part in the FAST training, they see that it's very difficult sometimes to make those decisions. Generally, we have people who, and officers here, that are very compassionate and would resist using force if they have that opportunity. But going to the FAST room and seeing that things change very quickly. Obviously, our scenarios are scripted and they are projected on a wall there in the FAST room. But we give them some opportunity to see how difficult it is to make those decisions. Major?
I think the major's having some technical difficulties. While we wait for him to come back online, I just wanted to jump in there on what Mark just said. We do these town hall meetings, and we encourage people to show up to them, and sometimes we have a hard time getting the participation that we'd like to have. But one of the other classes that we do besides the Citizen Police Academy is a police citizen encounter class, where we talk about our use of force policies. We talk about these very issues in a town hall format where people can ask any question they'd like to ask. And we stay there until all the questions have been answered. But we go through constitutional rights. We talk about traffic stops and the interaction between police and citizens on traffic stops, what the citizens' rights are on a traffic stop, what information they have to give us, what they don't have to give us, search and seizure law, and so on, so that we're constantly training and putting that information out there to the public. And also we're hearing back from the public about what are things they don't understand, what are things they don't like, what are things that we can be doing better. And I encourage all of you to attend one. We're in the middle of the COVID problem right now, so we're not doing the classes right this minute. But we put all that out on Facebook and other social media platforms when we do have them, and we invite you to attend. There are several different types of classes. We do an active shooter class that can help you stay safe in your place of work, or just when you're out in public, the mall, or wherever those tragic events can happen. You'll have a lot more information and things that you can do that can keep you safe. So I encourage you to look us up when everybody gets back to being able to meet in groups again. Major? Appears we're still having a problem with the major being able to come on, and unfortunately he's the narrator. He has the questions that you guys are trying to ask us. I can't hear you. Yes, sir. All right, very good. We can't see you, but we can hear you. we've had a policy banning chokeholds unless it was the officer felt that his life was in danger. Was the only time he could use it. And we have since then changed that to where we just flat out banned them.
It's a great question. We actually follow some state mandated guidelines on teaching de-escalation. We started teaching under the governor's initiative about 4 to 5 years ago. And that instruction deals with understanding, number one, who are we dealing with? Is it a person that is having some type of mental issue, some type of mental break? Do they have some type of underlying condition that psychologically they have a hard time dealing with certain types of issues? We also teach them on how to talk to folks. And it's been a part of our policy for quite some time in dealing with situations. We want officers to take time. And also, it's better for the officer to wait for an additional officer so that we have several officers there to assist. And the other underlying principle to that, and Captain Stafford hit on this, is we teach them to take their time. If you have a situation that is not quickly de-escalating, sometimes it's better to use conversation, talk to the person. Sometimes you can calm down a situation over a period of time just by a good conversation with a person, understanding where they're coming from by asking pertinent questions as to what is going on in their life at that time. Now, as far as de-escalation when it comes to use of force, we ask our officers to only use that force which is necessary to affect the arrest. And we want them to understand that force that is necessary is important, but also when it comes to using force, what's the importance of that force versus the possible injury that could result in that force? So we have a lot of things that we have to teach them to, so that they are cognizant of the fact that de-escalation is one of those tools. And if we can try to de-escalate and come to some type of nonviolent conclusion rather than using that force. But de-escalation has been an important part of our training for quite some time. And like I said, we use the guidelines now under the governor's initiative, which not only talks about the principles in de-escalation, but also gives them some good scenarios, some good videos to see and help them to dissect the situation so that they can understand the proper steps. Now, they can't go down a checklist every time, but we want them to have the verbal skills that helps them get to a situation, hopefully, without having to use that force. Major. I didn't hear that one. Can you hear me?
Can you hear us, Major? We had another technical problem.
I can hear.
Now.
It's a good question. We have we're listed for 101 officers right now. I think we have 96 full-time officers. Out of that, I can tell you that all of our supervisors that are on the road right now and some of our detective supervisors have been through the CIT training. On top of that, we have taught CIT principles in a separate class, but we do have CIT. I can't give you an exact number, but we had quite a few go through the state-sponsored CIT course here some time ago, and we've continued teaching those principles in our yearly training. Major?
That's a training issue. Obviously, if they put it on the back of their neck and they're choking the person, that's a chokehold, which we've already talked about is banned at this agency. There is a proper way to restrain somebody to get them into handcuffs, which is part of our defensive tactics training. That does not put the person in any danger of choking at all. But the proper way to do that has the knee more going from the top of the back down towards their legs. Right? So essentially, you're using pinning their shoulder down to get them in handcuffs. And the minute they're in handcuffs, there's no reason to be on top of them anymore. Officers are trained about positional asphyxiation. This is not something that's new. And you should not have multiple officers laying on top of somebody for a long period of time. That's a training issue and a supervision issue that if you're seeing that in your use of force videos and so on, it should be addressed immediately. We certainly would here, but there is a proper way to handcuff somebody when they're down on their stomach. It is a fact of police work that we have to put people on the ground to get them handcuffed when they're resisting us. There's not going to be a way for us to change that, but there is a way to do it properly and safely. Major,
if I may add something to that, Captain Stafford hit on this. In our defensive tactics instruction, which I'm a part of here at the police department, we make sure that when it comes to those situations where you're having to use joint manipulation to handcuff somebody and they're on their stomach, that the knees are actually not on the body of the subject. We actually use something called an upper quadrant V, where the knees are actually adjacent to the body and the arm is manipulated to a point where it's not painful, but we can gain compliance and basically keep that person breathing until we can get the cuffs applied. And like Captain Stafford said, as soon as the cuffs are on, there's no reason for that person to be on their stomach. We can either put them in a rescue position or have them sitting straight up so that they're able to breathe. Major? Obviously, in the academy, they get quite a bit of defensive tactics training. I believe that class during the academy is an entire week. And in that class in the academy, they learn some of the same techniques we teach here at the police department. We follow up that training here at the department at least once a year. And some of that defensive tactics training is hand-to-hand and in our DT room. Some of the techniques that I talked about earlier, we have them demonstrate those techniques to us. The techniques that we use in defensive tactics, we also want to make sure that they, again, understand that talking to the subject, giving warnings is important before we try to go hand-to-hand with somebody in our DT room, because we believe the practice that way, when they get out there in the real world and have an encounter, that they'll fall back on their training. Major?
Well, police officers are trained to shoot to stop the threat. Those are the training that we put on, and it's been like that since I've been a police officer for 25 years. I think where some of the confusion comes in is why do we shoot for center mass rather than trying to shoot them in the arm or the leg or something like that? And the very real reason is because in real life, you're under pressure when you believe your life's being threatened by someone else. Someone's shooting at you, for example. You will not be able to shoot that person that accurately. The police actually have a pretty low accuracy rate when they're in a gunfight. And it has to do with a lot of adrenaline and things that are going on inside of your body. There's a fight or flight reaction that happens because we're human. The fact that we wear this uniform, and depending on where you are in the country, we had 10 or 20, 30 weeks of training to become police officers, doesn't make us any less human beings. We know some tactics, but unfortunately, most police officers get 1 week of training on firearms, and usually 2 days of that's how to take the firearm apart, put it back together, clean it, how to operate it safely, and so on. And the rest of the time is trying to qualify so that you can meet the state standard to be let out of the police academy. Now, we do a lot more work than that here at our agency with their firearms training, because we want them to be proficient and be safe and make good decisions with it. But there are a lot of agencies in this country that just can't, and they may get 1 day of training a year, and that is made up of them showing up at the range, shooting whatever the course of fire is to qualify, cleaning their gun, and then going back out on the road. And the proficiency with firearm is just not there. If you're an expert with your firearm, it'll be very difficult under real life situations to pick and choose your target on a moving human body and be that accurate with it. So essentially what we're taught is to shoot the biggest part of the body. And unfortunately, there are vital organs there, and many times the person dies from being shot. But that's not what we're not trained to shoot them to kill them. We're really just trained to shoot them where we have the best shot of actually hitting the person to stop the threat. Major? Can you hear us, Lieutenant Edwards?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Sorry about that. So twice a year, we have our officers attend the firing range. And during those trainings, obviously, qualification is required by state mandate. So that is just a small portion of our firearms training. During our firearms training day, we do our qualifications, but we also make sure that they're proficient in several tasks that put them into high stress situations. We want to make sure that they're able to operate that weapon in high stress situations and hit the target accurately. And we also train them in low light situations. It's very difficult handling a firearm with a flashlight or even a weapon mounted light, and then to be able to see the target accurately and place accurate shots on target. One thing that Captain Stafford mentioned is, training to shoot dead center mass, and it has been trained that way for a long time. One of the points that I had a doctor in one of our Citizens Police Academy classes, and he kind of confirmed a lot of things that I've heard over the years, is that a lot of people say, well, why don't you shoot them in the leg? Well, when you have a femoral artery running through the leg, a shot to the leg can be just as deadly as a shot to center mass. So that question is posed quite a bit. We want to make sure that our officers shoot center mass because that is the most accurate shot for them in a high stress situation. But to short answer that question, twice a year we put them through an intense training to make sure that they are proficient in their firearms and they can shoot under stress. Major? Generally, crowd control or field force is a training that we do not have here. We make sure that our officers are trained in the communication skills, but we're a department that generally, up until today, to this minute, we don't have issues with crowd control. We train our officers to be careful. We train them to be respectful of citizens. And for example, we had a gathering several weeks ago where we had some folks in the crowd that maybe didn't want us there, but we had most of the crowd there that was proud that we were there because we were handling the situation with respect for them and help them to understand that we're there to protect them during their gathering and make sure that nothing goes wrong. So as far as mobile field force, we don't have any training here. We do have several departments in the Atlanta area that do have mobile field forces that do train regularly. But up until this point, we haven't had any designated unit and no training for a unit like that.
Open range, open range.
Sure. We've had body cams now for several years, and the body cameras that we chose because they're actually integrated into our car dash cam system that we already had. So that gives us very often two perspectives when the officers get out of their cars. If their dash cam, obviously, if their car is pointed in the right direction, but at the very least, they'll have their body camera on. And the way that we wrote our policy on that is when the officer is dispatched to the call, they turn their body camera on at that time. And the reason why we did that is we knew that there are many times where an officer will get to a call and there will be some dynamic situation that's happening in front of them already, and they may not remember to turn it on. If they jump out of the car and there's already a fight going on, they may not turn on their body camera. So our folks turn it on the way, and that's also helped us with some other things where we had maybe an accident or some other things that's helped us review that situation. Our cameras also, if we know that there was an issue where the body camera wasn't activated at the time, and we catch it quickly enough, we can actually record after the fact. So even though the officer wasn't recording at the time, we can go back and capture some of that incident on the body camera, and we've used that several times. Again, when we review, we have a use of force, all of us are notified. I bring them into the command staff meetings, and there's a computer sitting in front of my chair in the command staff meeting that's for nothing else except for to run videos that we project up on a big screen that were use of force, pursuits, accidents, anything that we're reviewing about our officers. So that's how that works.
Absolutely. Before I get into that, I would like to mention Chief Sparks reminded me that we do have open range for our officers as well for the firearms training. So I did want to mention that once a month they are able to come in and actually do some training on the firing range with us. And if they need assistance, we can help them out. What was the first part of that question, Major?
Can they have a GED?
As far as the GED or high school diploma, absolutely. We hire officers with GEDs or high school diplomas. When it comes to that requirement, we're 2 years of college or 2 years of military experience or 2 years of prior service. Some of those folks do have GEDs or high school diplomas, so they don't have to just have 2 years of college and those other two requirements. It has to be one of those three. And I would like to say that our department, we have a lot of folks with not only 2-year degrees, but also 4-year degrees and master's degrees. So we have a very well-educated department. And the second part of that question? Yes. Legal Update is a class that we put on usually in conjunction with another type of training that we see as necessary. So the Legal Update is generally just an update on what the legislature and the governor sign off on for new laws for the year. So generally new laws come into play on July 1st, And so we want to make sure our officers understand what the new laws are. We hit those, we teach about the laws that actually impact their job. So for instance, one of those laws may have been the change in the format of the implied consent when working incidents where there may be a suspected DUI. We have those officers come in and train on that in that legal update. Also, there may be changes in criminal law. There were several years where we had lots of changes in criminal law. We want to make sure that those officers understand that those laws have changed, that the way you charge a person may have changed. Some of those laws actually drop some of the offenses into misdemeanor categories. So very important that they understand what those new laws are, or if they're existing laws, how have they changed, and how's the charging changed for those incidents. Major?
You came in and out just a little bit, Major. What was the first part? He's reviewing our policy online. What was the specific part he was asking about? That's correct. Well, again, in our review policy, we're going to pull the body cam and dash cam from the police officer, and we're going to bring that into the command staff review meeting and watch it. And if the officer has got the subject handcuffed and they're not resisting arrest anymore, then there should be no force after that point. If there is force, it's going to be deemed to be excessive, and there'll be some discipline handed down depending on, every situation is different. What exactly did they do? Generally, we'll call them in. What was their perspective? Why did they think they needed to do it? But that's not something that's acceptable. Major.
Absolutely. So officers are charged with answering a wide variety of calls. Some of those are very serious. Some of them include deaths of, as I said, young children. Some of them include serious motor vehicle accidents. And what we have is a reporting system in place called Guardian Tracking, where we're able to track these situations where officers have had these serious incidents. And we as supervisors can understand, okay, this person has seen a very serious accident. What kind of intervention can we put into place to help that officer out? The city of Douglasville offers an employee assistance program through Tanner that allows our officers to go out to off campus to the EAP center and actually talk to a licensed counselor and work through some of these issues that they may be thinking about it. Burnout is very serious in any line of work if you do it long enough, but in this job that we have as police officers and the things that we see, it is very prevalent. So it's very important for supervisors to recognize when officers are experiencing burnout, maybe from the calls that they answered, and then, offer them that assistance that they need. The great thing about our department is we are family oriented. Our officers are not numbers. We actually have relationships with our officers. We want to make sure that they're okay. So we have a great group of supervisors that stay on top of things and make sure that our officers are taken care of. Major?
There is not, no.
That's a great question. Our officers do run into situations where they deal with subjects who have either a mental disability or some type of mental defect. So it's very important for officers to understand what that person is going through. And if family is close by or a friend that understands the situation, it's always very important information for the officer to know. Several years ago, we had a lady come in to talk about children with special needs, and specifically those on the autism spectrum disorder. And she was able to explain to us that it's very important for us to understand that the actions of a person in the spectrum may act differently. They may act what we perceive as violently, but it's not violent to us. So that kind of training helps us out. But on top of that, if there's somebody that understands the situation, our officers are humble enough to take that information and use that to help the person out. Maybe. Absolutely. So if an officer is interested in a class, that officer is required to submit their request through our system, and it has to be approved through the direct supervisor. Once it's approved through direct supervision, I will take a look at it, and if it is pertinent to their job and gives them the tools to do their job better, then we approve it. All of our jobs, all of our instruction is either handled at the State Police Academy, down at Forsyth, or at the regional academies such as North Central and Austell, or Fulton County Public Training Center down near the airport. So as far as external classes, there's a few that we allow officers to go to only if it pertains to their specific job. For instance, internal affairs, we send folks to internal affairs training off-site. That's not necessarily through our State Police Academy or regional academies. We might send officers to classes that have to deal with interdiction that's taught by interdiction experts. And then if there's other classes that officers go to on their own time, obviously, if it's not post-certified class, we generally don't hear about it. I'm not sure what a warder class is, but all of our classes that we offer here and that we send our officers to are usually class offered at a State Police Academy, or our GIPSTIC or POST actually recognizes as a class that is acceptable for training. Major.
Yes, there is. One of the things that happens with law enforcement officers is obviously we don't make a lot of money. So what the officers do is they work extra jobs where they're usually providing security in uniform on their time off for traffic control, if they're repaving a road, or a restaurant maybe want them in there. They've had some problems in there in the past. Bowling alley, different places like that. So we have a very specific policy about the fact that they need 8 hours of rest in a 24-hour period. They can't work so much that they're not getting enough rest.
question. When it comes to Taser, they offer several different distances in their cartridges. We use a 25-foot cartridge. Obviously, a Taser deployed at 25 feet is not going to be effective because more than likely it's not going to hit its target accurately. Generally, the rule of thumb is 10 to 12 feet is the most accurate distance. And we, in our training with our officers, we have them fire the Taser cartridges, the 25-foot cartridges, at distances ranging from 15 to 16 feet down to about 7 to 8 feet, just so that they can see what the difference in impact is. And also, another thing that people don't realize is it's very important what the target zones are in Taser training. And if you are firing a Taser at a long distance, your target zone is probably not going to be hit. So the preferred target areas are on our targets, and we want them to see visually the feedback from hitting a target in the preferred target areas. So 25 feet is the distance of our cartridges. We train our officers 10 to 12 feet gives you the most accuracy. Major?
I just want to repeat that. I'm getting some feedback that your questions are hard to hear. The question was about how often are our town hall meetings, and generally our town hall meetings are quarterly. They're put out on social media so that people know when they are, and everybody's invited to come. The second part of the question was, will they be able to engage with the command staff and specifically Chief Sparks? And Chief Sparks is always at the town hall meetings. The deputy chief is there, the major is there, and if not all 4 captains, there are at least a couple of us at every one of these town hall meetings. We have them here at the police department in our conference center, and we've even gone out into the public and had our command staff meetings at restaurants during breakfast time, coffee time, and so on. And if I'm not sure where the person is asking from, but if you're here in town and you have a venue that we could have such a meeting where there will be, a good number of the public would be able to hear us, see us, and attend, then we'd be happy to talk to you about what that venue is where we could come to you. Major? If I could say one more thing if we're wrapping it up, Major. Every year in January, we put out the end of the year report. That's because it takes me through the end of December to complete it. And we started doing that several years ago. That tells all the training that we've done. It shows the demographics of our agency. It talks about all the accidents we've had, as far as car accidents. It talks about the uses of force we've had. It talks about the number of police citizen encounters that we've had, how many calls we've answered, and so on. It gives you a great snapshot of the agency over that previous year, usually compares it to the year before that, so you can see if there's any fluctuations in the crime rate and the use of force rates and so on. And we started doing it so that we knew which direction to go in. We had a focused direction to head in for the next year, and the chief said, let's put it on Facebook so everybody can see it. So that is done every year, usually about the first week or mid-January. So please look for that and read over it and get to know your police department and understand the facts of what we do. And if you have questions about it, again, we do those town hall meetings, usually the first town hall meeting of the year. That's one of the main topics of conversation. and people can ask questions about it at that time. Thank you, Major.
All right, Major. All right, can you hear me? All right, I really want to thank everybody for participating and posing those questions to our Office of Professional Standards, Captain Stafford and Lieutenant Edwards. I think they did an outstanding job. And if you're home, just give them a hand. They have a big job to make sure that all our men and women are trained professionally and ensuring that our department maintain our state certification. I hope you understand that we are completely transparent police department. We don't plan and we will not try to push anything under the rug, so to speak. The sun is shining on whatever your police department do. And as I said, it's your department. And we ask that you come by and visit us and look at some of the training, see some of the training that we do, walk around the department and see what we offer. And we just, we would love to see you. So again, I want to thank all our citizens for taking a little time out to spend with us. We will be getting back to hopefully having some in-session town hall meetings, but we're going to be led by the doctors during this COVID-19 crisis. We will be having a meeting on Hollis Street, at our Hollis Street house, this Thursday from 7 to 8. We will be speaking on empowering the community. So if you can, come by our Hollis Street house. We call it the House of Hope. This was a house that the Douglasville Police Department started to rent in a drug area. So we trying to change the outlook on that area there. So come by, hear a good word, and see what your police department is doing. As I say before I go, we are one with the community, and we are the community. God bless all of you all, and we'll do this again. Keep watching our Facebook page. We got something exciting coming up. Good night.